Welcome back, everyone. Okay, I'm going to start a new series I've been thinking about doing for a while, and I was kind of inspired by one of the YouTubers that I watch a lot called Calico Silver. He did a series of music where you choose 5 songs from the Billboard Top 100 year-end charts that particular year. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to choose a year starting from 1965 and I'm going to about 1995. So I'm going to choose like a 30-year span, and I may pick back up on it later, but I'm going to choose that 30-year span because that seems to be the years that there were a lot of albums released. And I know a lot of music today is mostly about hit singles, and music's always been about hit singles, but there was a period of time, and I'm going to call it that 30-year stretch, where albums actually mattered. And so we're going to start that series, and I'm going to start it today with the year 1965. And so I'm going to choose 5 albums, my 5 choice albums from that year, 1965. So let's get started. I'm going to start with number 5. My number 5 album for 1965 is going to be Rolling Stones' number 2 album by the Rolling Stones. This album is, of course, being in 65, it's got that early Rolling Stones sound. The sounds like it's in a garage. The production, I love the 60s production, of course. I say that as much as possible because it's true. It's just the way that the 60s sounded. I love the way those albums were produced back then. But this was before the Rolling Stones became like the 70s version of the Rolling Stones. This was the kind of, still the guys that kind of dressed up a little bit. But they still had that raunchy garage rock sound. And so this album is just a fun album. It's a good rock and roll album for 1965. Probably the best rock album of 1965. It's got Time Is On My Side. That's probably the biggest single release off that album. Time is on my side. I mean, such a great song. I know it's been used in commercials and movies, but it still has, an impact, I think, as just a good song. There's also like Down Home Girl is on this album as well. There's another track that I really enjoy. Let me get down to that. Yeah, Can't Be Satisfied. There's a lot of songs off this album that kind of remind me of Creedence Clearwater Revival. I call this the Rolling Stones CCR album. And what's funny is there is even a recording of Susie Q on it. So both bands do Susie Q. But yeah, coming in at number 5, the Rolling Stones, number 2. Coming in at number 4 is a folk rock band from California. And this band recorded a lot of Bob Dylan material. They recorded some Pete Seeger material. Roger McGuinn was one of the main leaders of the band. David Crosby was in the band at one time. And it's, of course, the Byrds. And the album is Turn, Turn, Turn by the Byrds. Of course, it features the turn, to everything, turn, turn, turn. Beautiful song. This was inspired by a Pete Seeger adaptation of the book of Ecclesiastes. I think the 3rd chapter of the book of Ecclesiastes in the Bible, where it talks about to everything there is a season, time to be born, a time to die, things of that nature. So it was inspired from Pete Seeger's adaptation of the Bible, book of Ecclesiastes. Folk rock. The Byrds were folk rock until they later became just total country. The thing about the Byrds, a lot of vocal harmonies, beautiful harmonies, and that later went into Crosby, Stills and Nash. David Crosby with Stephen Stills and Graham Nash. But the interesting thing about the Byrds was they use a 12-string guitar, and so they had that unique sound, and you can hear the 12-string sound the Byrd sound when some of these songs come in, such as Turn Turn Turn. They redid Bob Dylan's Times Are a Changin', and so there's a lot of just some really good folk rock songs on this album. It's a solid album, and I really like it, so it comes in at number 4. Number 3 for me is Rubber Soul by the Beatles. It's a folk rock kind of album. I call it my autumn album, the album I like to listen to in the fall. It's where the Beatles, they kind of started getting a little bit, they had I guess, flashes of psychedelia in this album. This is really when it started. Even if you look at the cover of the album, it started, they started between sort of a folk rock and a psychedelic kind of sound at that time. Some of the songs off of it, Norwegian Wood, Drive My Car, of course, is one of the I think it's the beginning track off the album. In My Life, Nowhere Man. But my favorite song off the album is If I Ever Needed Someone. Beautiful song. I love that song. But this is just a solid album by the Beatles. This is not the only Beatles album in the list, but Rubber Soul is the album right before Revolver came out. It's right before they really got into their psychedelic stage. So it's sort of that adaptation. You get a lot of good stuff coming from the British invasion era, and it's kind of mixed, like I said, with some folk rock and things of that nature. So coming in at number 3, Rubber Soul by the Beatles. Coming in at number 2, Highway 61 Revisited by Bob Dylan. One reason I really love this album, I love Like a Rolling Stone. To Be Left Alone. I love that song. And you might not like Bob Dylan's vocals, but he's got a unique style, and he's such a great songwriter. He is. You've got to appreciate the way that he composed songs and the lyrics. My goodness, this guy was incredible at writing lyrics. And expressing a lot of the views of the time that he lived in. Folk icon, folk rock icon. A lot of the folk people didn't like it when he went to folk rock, but he made it his own. And but Like a Rolling Stone, of course, the title track, Highway 61. Great music on this album. I can listen to this album, just put it on and listen to it. But the final track, the epic Desolation Row. Oh my goodness, I love this song. This is my favorite song off the album. Like a Rolling Stone's second, of course, but just a wonderful song. Bob Dylan is just, again, if you just listen to the lyrics, every little sentence just opens up a new world. So coming in at number 2, Highway 61 Revisited by Bob Dylan. And my number 1 album for 1965 is The Beatles' Help. Love this album. It's got Help. It's got my favorite song off the album, The Ticket to Ride. It's got The Night Before. What a great song. The Night Before. It's got You're Gonna Lose That Girl. Love that song. Yesterday. Yesterday. Beautiful song by Paul McCartney. My mother used to sing that song to me. Gosh, this album is just packed full of goodness, and that's why it's number 1. Oh, also John Lennon's You've Got to Hide Your Love Away. Wonderful song. There's not a song on this album I don't like. Love every song on this album. Help is definitely my number one favorite album of 1965. So if you like this video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you haven't already, share it, give me your thoughts. What was your favorite album from 1965? And until we meet again, thank you for listening, and you guys take care.